Mental health history. History is deadly important to consider when assessing mental health injuries and or treatment. Here's another example of, in first aid, history is considered in heart rate, breaths per minute, what's normal for the individual. And I'm suggesting it's also deadly important to consider in mental health, and I would say not in the traditional sense. I would say that's one large reason why I hate to say mental health has failed individuals or patients. So on this hike up to this mountain, there isn't a lot of mountain around us, but let's just show you, if I could, some of the scenery. We're at a lake. And so, we're at a lake on top of a mountain. And so we got talking on the hike about somewhere along the way I had a friend, I shouldn't say a friend, but a person, tell me about when he was guiding he had somebody book a tour, a guided tour up a mountain, and when he seen the age of the couple coming from Europe, he decided to call them to speak with them. And then he learned of their history. So a hike, in that sense, would be a physical consideration. But he wanted to make sure that it was right for them at their age. So this wasn't first aid, this is just health-wise, and not of physical injuries, but he wanted to get a history. And he spoke with them, and he agreed that they could do the hike. And they arrived to Alberta for this. Guided tour, and the day before the hike, they assembled for a talk, pre-trip planning, tailgate meeting, safety meeting, and I think it was the wife, he said, had stayed behind, and the elderly gentleman excused himself, left early, and asked to leave early. And the guide, I remember where I met the guide. The guide told me that The next morning, at the start of the trail, they asked if they could just follow behind the group. And I got that wrong. So let me backtrack to the evening before. The group voiced concerns that the elderly couple would not be in shape to do so, to participate. Then he reassured them, the group, that they were famous in the hiking world. Both the husband and wife were famous hikers, and I hiked most of anything that could be. And so that's initially what reassured the guide. And and so he in turn reassured the group that the couple could participate. And on the trail, they left behind the group, started behind the group, followed along. And when the group stopped for a break, they asked permission to continue. And and they got to the destination point before the group did. And so history is important. How important is history? For me, 2016 in Fort McMurray, I knew I was overly stressed, to put it mildly. That I didn't need any more stress, and I said I needed I was overwhelmed with everything, and more on that later. But I could think enough to know that I needed a room in a home with homeowners for neighbors, fenced yard, garage, garden, dog, plus or minus variations of. And I asked for help to get into a home, and I said that I would need a room in a home or a basement suite, and that I would need help to make sure that I got the right place for me, of considering the stress and the history. The history being because all my life I lived in similar conditions, where it was always in a home, sometimes in a small town away from the city, and through my teen years in the city, and since through adulthood, I've always had homeowners for neighbors, fenced yard, garage, garden, dog. When I was younger, there was no fence, and we had a shed. We had a garden, we had a home, neighbors had homes, so variations of, but through my teen years we didn't have a garage, but we had fenced yards and gardens, and so so I needed familiar surroundings to minimize the stress. So that ties in the history. Why is it important? Because those people who would offer to help did not consider the history, no matter that I said I needed what I needed and why. And so it added more stress on me. And I didn't know exactly where I was going, but without any foresight of where I may be going into a home, I started sleeping 20 hours a day. And then for the month I worked, I was supposed to work longer, but when I started sleeping 20 hours a day, it doesn't necessarily work on the job, and I lost my job, and then I moved in, now unable to pay. And so then I was there in the apartment 3 weeks on the second floor of a 3-story apartment building in the slums of McMurray. So, needless to say, the added stress of the unknown caused me to sleep 20 hours a day. And then I ended up in the second floor of a 3-story apartment building. And so, because, and so after 4 weeks of sleeping 20 hours a day, I considered I had to move out, that I had to go back to being homeless so that I could not sleep 20 hours a day, so that I could function, so that I could get things done. That's one example of why and how history is important in mental health. What's another example of history being important in mental health? History. Okay, so let's take this here now as an example. I'm laying in the grass. Why am I laying in the grass? Resting, dozing, napping. I did fall asleep earlier. Woken up not long ago. My friends are continuing on the trail, going to the next lake. And that trail apparently goes around the lake. And I could have pushed physically to go further, but I will have other additional chances to walk longer and greater distances as I rebuild my physical health. So I thought I would take a break. And I thought laying in the grass would be a good thing to do. So I woke up moments ago. I was woken up by a squirrel that was would say on my shoulder. Not literally, but I could feel him sniffing me. And that's kind of what woke me, and so then I thought I should talk on the subject of how history is relevant to heal and treat mental health injuries. So in history, I've said I've needed to go on hikes. But to do that effectively, there needs to be other factors considered, like there's my friend the squirrel. No, he ran off. Food, shower, clothing, all need to be considered to properly, effectively tackle something like hikes in the wilderness. So, so laying in the grass is something I've done at least since I've joined the military. And I've had a lot of naps in the grass in the military. I hate to say it, but it's one of my favorite things to do. And it's something I can do, I would say, at least in my trade, being in the artillery. So, for different reasons, in the old days it used to be that we would fire artillery shells in training, and we'd get an end of mission, and we'd often work long days, and so often tired. And so during an end of mission, you might get some rest, lay down, something like this, and fall asleep. And you could have a mission called, and you could be sound asleep, while sometimes between the trails of the gun near the breach. And I've stepped over guys, and guys have stepped over me while somebody's asleep, to load the gun, to fire the gun. And the crazy, unbelievable thing is, guys would sleep through the guns going off. And so you'll often wake up in the grass like this, and there wouldn't be one round that would wake you. There could be dozens of rounds fired before somebody would wake, if somebody would wake. I don't know how to explain it, but the sound coming off the guns is deafening. And so I've often found myself waking up sometimes after a mission, sometimes in the middle of a mission. And just kind of wake up in the grass like this, and I just found it so resting, so peaceful. And so besides that, that's on the resting, sleeping in the grass. And on the subject of hikes, we were talking about that on the hike up here. Is at one point I was with a former girlfriend, partner, called my wife. We would often go hike some of the mountains west of Rocky Mountain House near Nordegg. We'd often go camping and then decide to hike one of the mountains. Not necessarily some of the bigger mountains, but some of the smaller mountains even. And we'd go do that for lunch, just for fun, just to have lunch on top of the mountain, and that was a common thing. And besides that, we've hiked on the rail line from Rocky Mountain House to Nordegg, and it's, I don't know, over 100 kilometers. And we didn't do that in one stretch, and sometimes it would require camping at one spot and hiking the length of the rail line in one direction and then walking back. So you could almost say we've done that at the abandoned rail line twice. And so between all the hiking I've done and love to do, that's my history and background. And when I was a kid, I got the bug when I raised money to do a Terry Fox walk run. So the day of the Terry Fox event, I started by walking it, and some friends were running and caught up to us, and so I decided then to run. And I ran the rest of the way, about 3/4 of the way. But I was already into sports, but so that's kind of where my love for running and hiking and distances and pushing and come from. And so it's something I've always enjoyed. And it was well after I joined the military, I later, now about 20 years ago, realized I don't like to run outside, but I love to run on the treadmill. So I just love the convenience of the treadmill, but otherwise I love to hike in nature, and I like to do races, trail races and road races. I don't do lots of them, but that's I don't find the transition from the treadmill to the trail is a concern. But so that's part of who I am, what I love, and here and now, I would say that I need help to get back into a place where I could do that, and everybody refuses to help me get back to a stable mental health with the things I love to do. Things like food security would be a first good step to allowing and encouraging me to do things like these runs and hikes. And so as my mental health deteriorated, I got to the point where I could by December 2018, I could not walk 2 blocks. Then by 2 months later, I could not walk 1 block. 1 month later, I don't remember if it was January or February 2019. It might have been January. By January 2019, I could not walk 1 block emotionally. By August 2020, I could not walk half a block. By November 2020, I would work up a sweat walking up the stairs in my home, in my duplex. And I also worked up a sweat walking between the kitchen and the living room. And I've been pushing myself since, now that I have some stability. And I could be pushing myself further and greater, but everybody has refused that I needed food stability. And that largely requires a kitchen to cook in. And I used to love to cook, but everybody refuses to accept that I need cooking classes. So with cooking classes, it's been so long, it's been 13 plus years since I've cooked. Recently I've made banana bread, and I've also recently made some kind of stew in the crock pot. And so, but otherwise I don't have a kitchen, and so I can't really cook, and I still need cooking classes, and I found a volunteer to teach cooking classes. But groups, agencies, and individuals have told me that I'm wrong, that I don't need cooking classes because they refuse to ask the history. So for me to effectively get back into shape and greater distances and greater running and greater hikes and longer distances, I'll need a few things like cooking classes, food security, reliable transportation so that I can get to some of these hiking points, things like that, so that I can drive to a treadmill, because I don't like to run outside, but I love to run on a treadmill, so it would just be easier if I could get to a treadmill to run on, so that I don't have to walk to a treadmill to exercise, to walk home. It would just be easier, and all of that would alleviate some struggles of my mental health. So how important is history? Well, everybody refuses to consider that I love to hike, that I love to sleep in the grass, like this. And so, I've always liked to run, I've always liked to hike, I've always liked to sleep in the grass, always, meaning about 30 years. And so, now, everybody's saying that I'm wrong, that I don't know what I need, that I can't have normalcy. Is it unreasonable to ask to go for a hike? Is it unreasonable to ask or to suggest that I need to relearn to cook? Like a double amputee needs to heal. Like a double amputee needs the structure and support to get, call it what you will, stilts, peg legs, bionic legs, before he relearns to walk. Just because he used to could doesn't mean he can again. Just because he used to walk doesn't mean he can walk with peg legs. Now that he's got peg legs, the individual needs to relearn to walk, like I need to relearn to cook. And considering I used to love to cook, it's like I'm being tortured, prevented from cooking. So, mental health history is deadly important. Hiking. For me to hike, cooking is absolutely relevant. Showering is absolutely relevant. Physical health is absolutely relevant. And so cooking is just one small piece of the puzzle to helping me get to better physical health. And I know I could have healed faster if I got any of those supports that I've needed. And the frustrating part is I couldn't get any support. Everybody refused to help me. It actually drove me crazy, and on that note, I would say I'm in a similar position. Dr. Ignace Semmelweis of what's called the Semmelweis reflex. And Dr. Ignace Semmelweis was driven crazy. Went into the asylum because everybody refused new evidence to treat infections. The first part of treating infections, Dr. Semmelweis found to reduce the number of deathbed fever deathbed fever is what killed birthing mothers. About 20% of birthing mothers died by deathbed fever. This was in the 1800s because doctors refused to accept that they would cause birthing mothers to die of infection. Dr. Ignace Semmelweis implemented a practice to encourage doctors and nurses to wash their hands between patients, and found that the childbed fever was reduced from 20% mortality rate to about 2 or 3%. I don't remember exactly, but it's about 2 or 3% from 20. That's a significant, great, and marked evidence. And there's Squirrely. And so the other doctors refused to wash, some doctors from other hospitals refused to wash their hands, saying that they surely could not be causing infections, killing mothers. So it went on for several decades after Dr. Semmelweis died in the insane asylum. He was driven insane because everybody refused to accept new evidence. And I would say that I would say I understand it better, and that I also was, I would talk to my therapist about this. I will talk to my therapist about this because I think she would agree that I was, let's just say, not right through winter and spring 2021, to put it mildly. So, and it's because everybody refused to help me. I told them what I needed, and everybody refused to help me. And it was driving me insane, and so instead of, I don't know, because everybody refused to help me is exactly why I started my own trauma treatment center, and what I've called extreme treatment for extreme trauma, to help people that walk in circles talking to themselves and or largely cannot function in society or parts thereof. I was there myself twice in the last 6 years, and I've today I would say that I've largely come out of it, but I still need help. And so what's the word? So because I've come to understand it, that's exactly why I've started my own trauma treatment center, so I can show others, like Dr. Semmelweis did. He showed others, and they still refuse to accept the evidence. So I'm going to show others, and I don't expect anybody to accept the new information or evidence. But it's one step, and that'll require more work to show how to treat extreme trauma, the kind of trauma that's out of this world, like ET, extreme treatment, extreme trauma, out of this world trauma, uh, incomprehensible trauma. I would say, I hate to say doctors don't understand, and the only reason I do is because I've been there twice. And the first time it took me 3 months to be able to get to a position where I could function. By the 3-month mark, the uncontrollable panic attacks had subsided. Though I could function about the first month mark from the point I started getting help, and there's reasons that I'll be for another day. Maybe I can talk about it shortly in this video. But the point is, the first time I healed of that to be able to function took 3 months. The second time now has taken me 3 years without any supports. A marked and important time frame. And that's largely what was driving me insane, is the fact that everybody refused to help me, no matter that I would describe that through 2016, it took 3 months to heal with support. Now, without support, it's taken me 3 years. And everybody still refused to help me, is what was driving me insane. And so I've changed my focus. Instead of telling others, I'm going to show others by treating my new friends what like first aid, patient and physical injuries. First aid of physical injuries is described as a patient, and so my patients of mental health injuries are two of them clearly cannot function at varying degrees, and a third, I would say, can function but cannot think clearly. And I've been there too, so 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 I've decided to show others, like Dr. Semmelweis has, but there was Semmelweis did not change the medical industry, but the reflex to refuse new evidence or information is now referred to as the Semmelweis reflex, the reflex to refuse new evidence and information. So even though I've told others and they refuse to, now I'm preparing to show others, and I don't expect anybody to accept it. But it'll take more work for society to change how mental health injuries are treated. So on that note, history is important, and Dr. Semmelweis is absolutely important to consider. And the Semmelweis reflex is not only now accepted in the medical field, but across society in all aspects of society and various fields, and so also applies to mental health. So the Semmelweis reflex, the reflex to refuse new evidence or information, applies to what's it called? To why the 22 vets that commit suicide are not getting the help they need. And that's a large reason why I'm doing this. And so my extreme trauma treatment center will focus on helping the 22 vets that commit suicide to reduce that number, and people in society who struggle with addictions or mental health, who at least the population at large that can't function, the vets that commit suicide, deadly mental health injuries. I've already identified deadly mental health injuries. That'll be a topic for another day. But for today, That's it on the history and how history is deadly important to consider in mental health treatment.